The United States military has executed over 136 dangerous inmates since 1916. But in the last 50 years, no executions have been carried out. Currently, 4 men sit on military death row waiting for their final punishment. These are some of the most dangerous criminals in military history. Men who committed horrific crimes that shocked the nation. Today we will examine each of these cases, starting with one of the most unusual legal stories in American history, Ronald Adrian Gray. Between April 1986 and January 1987, the area around Fort Bragg, North Carolina, was gripped by fear. A serial killer was on the loose, targeting young women with shocking brutality. What made this case even more terrifying was that the killer was not some stranger lurking in the shadows. He was a U.S. Army soldier, trusted to protect and serve his country. Ronald Adrian Gray was born in Cochran, Georgia, and joined the Army as a cook. He was stationed at Fort Bragg, one of the largest military installations in the United States. To his fellow soldiers, he seemed like an ordinary guy doing his job. But behind this normal appearance was a monster who would become one of the most notorious serial killers in military history. During this 9-month period, Gray committed a series of horrific crimes that shocked the military community and the civilian population around Fort Bragg. His victims included both civilians and fellow soldiers, showing that no one was safe from his violence. Gray's first known victim was Linda Jean Coates on April 27, 1986. He murdered the 23-year-old Campbell University student, beginning a pattern of violence that would continue for months. His most brutal crime occurred on December 15, 1986, when he targeted one of his fellow soldiers. Private Laurel Lee Vickery Clay was an 18-year-old soldier stationed at Fort Bragg. Witnesses later testified that they had seen her with Gray at a local Kmart before she disappeared. Gray abducted her, then raped, sodomized, and murdered her. He shot her multiple times and left her body in the woods at Fort Bragg. When Laura's car was found abandoned, investigators discovered Gray's fingerprints on it. Her decomposed body was found a month later, showing evidence of the terrible things Gray had done to her. Near her body, police found the murder weapon, a pistol that Gray had stolen in November 1986. Just 3 weeks later, on January 3, 1987, Gray attacked Private Mary Ann Namath in her own barracks. He entered under false pretenses, then tied her up, gagged her, and stabbed her multiple times after raping her. Somehow, Namath survived this brutal attack and was able to identify Gray as her attacker. Gray's final victim was Kimberly Ann Ruggles, a 23-year-old cab driver. On January 6, 1987, she was dispatched to pick up a passenger named Ron at Gray's address. Gray raped her, then stabbed her to death. Her body was found the next morning near her cab. Gray's fingerprints were found inside the cab, and Ruggles' fingerprints were found on money in Gray's possession. The investigation began to focus on Gray after his photograph appeared in local news reports. Private Namath, who had survived his attack, immediately identified him as the man who had assaulted her. This identification was the key that unlocked the entire case. Physical evidence quickly mounted against Gray. His fingerprints were found on Laura Vickery Clay's abandoned car and inside Kimberly Ruggles' cab. The murder weapon used to kill Laura was traced back to him. DNA evidence would later confirm his involvement in multiple crimes. Gray was arrested and faced overwhelming evidence linking him to multiple murders, rapes, and assaults. The investigation revealed a pattern of escalating violence that had terrorized the Fort Bragg community for 9 months. Ronald Gray faced charges in both civilian and military courts. In November 1987, he pleaded guilty in Cumberland County Superior Court to 22 felonies, including 2 counts of second-degree murder, multiple counts of rape, and other related charges. He received 8 life sentences, with 3 to be served consecutively. However, the military also had jurisdiction over his crimes, particularly the murder of Private Laura Vickery Clay and the assault on Private Namath. A military court-martial was convened at Fort Bragg from December 1987 to April 1988. During the military trial, Gray was convicted of 14 charges, including the premeditated murders of Private Vickery Clay and civilian Kimberly Ruggles, the attempted premeditated murder of Private Namath, multiple rapes, and other offenses. On April 12, 1988, Gray was unanimously sentenced to death by the military court. He was also dishonorably discharged from the Army and reduced in rank to Private E1. The commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division approved the sentence on July 29, 1988. As of 2025, Ronald Adrian Gray has been on military death row for approximately 37 years, making him the longest-serving inmate on military death row. He is imprisoned at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. In July 2008, President George W. Bush approved Gray's execution, marking the first time a U.S. president had approved a military death sentence since 1957. However, subsequent legal challenges have continued to delay the execution. No execution date has been set, and Gray's case continues through various legal appeals and reviews. Ronald Gray holds the unfortunate distinction of being the longest-serving prisoner on military death row. His case represents one of the most extensive serial killing sprees by an active-duty military member in U.S. history. The case is also notable because Gray received presidential approval for his execution in 2008, but legal challenges have prevented the sentence from being carried out. This highlights the complex legal process involved in military death penalty cases. Hassan Karim Akbar. On March 23, 2003, the United States had just begun its invasion of Iraq. American soldiers were stationed at Camp Pennsylvania in Kuwait, preparing for the dangerous mission ahead. These brave men and women were far from home, relying on each other for survival in a hostile environment. Among them was Sergeant Hassan Karim Akbar, a member of the 101st Airborne Division. What should have been a time of unity and brotherhood became a nightmare when one soldier turned his weapons against his own comrades. The camp was tense. Everyone knew they would soon cross into Iraq to face enemy forces. Soldiers were checking their equipment, writing letters home, and trying to get some rest before the battle ahead. Nobody expected that the greatest danger would come from within their own ranks. In the early morning hours of March 23, 2003, while most soldiers were sleeping, Hassan Akbar began his deadly plan. First, he quietly turned off the generator that powered their camp, plunging the area into darkness. This was not an accident, it was a calculated move to create confusion. Then Akbar armed himself with 4 hand grenades and his automatic rifle. He moved silently through the camp to where his fellow soldiers were sleeping in their tents, completely defenseless and trusting that they were safe among their brothers in arms. Without warning, Akbar threw the grenades into 3 different tents where soldiers were sleeping. The explosions were devastating. As soldiers stumbled out of their tents, confused and wounded, Akbar opened fire with his rifle. The attack lasted several terrifying minutes before other soldiers could subdue him. When the chaos ended, 2 officers were dead and 14 others were wounded, mostly from the deadly grenade shrapnel. The camp that should have been a place of safety had become a war zone. But the enemy was one of their own. Akbar was immediately captured at the scene. There was no question about who had committed this terrible crime. He was caught with the weapons in his hands. But investigators wanted to understand why a soldier would turn against his own unit. They discovered disturbing evidence in Akbar's personal diary. Entries dated February 4, 2003 revealed his growing anger and resentment toward his fellow soldiers. He wrote about feeling mistreated and humiliated by others in his unit. In one chilling entry he wrote, "I suppose they want to punk me or just humiliate me. Perhaps they feel that I will not do anything about that. They are right about that. I am not going to do anything about it as long as I stay here. But as soon as I am in Iraq, I am going to try and kill as many of them as possible." Military records showed that Akbar had recently been reprimanded for insubordination. He had also been told he would not be joining his unit's push into Iraq, which may have increased his anger and desire for revenge. Hassan Karim Akbar was charged with 2 counts of premeditated murder and multiple counts of attempted premeditated murder. His court-martial began in April 2005, more than 2 years after the attack. During the trial, Akbar's defense attorneys tried to save his life by arguing that he suffered from serious mental health problems. They claimed he had paranoia and sleep disorders that affected his judgment. They painted a picture of a troubled soldier who was not fully responsible for his actions. However, the prosecution had powerful evidence against him. They presented his diary entries to the court, showing that the attack was carefully planned, not the result of a mental breakdown. The diary proved that Akbar had been thinking about killing his fellow soldiers for weeks before the attack. The military jury heard testimony from survivors of the attack. They listened to the pain and trauma that Akbar had caused. They saw the evidence of premeditation in his own handwriting. On April 21, 2005, the jury found Hassan Karim Akbar guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to death for his crimes against his fellow soldiers. As of 2025, Hassan Karim Akbar has been on military death row for nearly 20 years. He is imprisoned at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the same facility that houses all military death row inmates. Akbar has exhausted his appeals through the military court system. On October 3, 2016, his final appeal was denied. The next step in his case requires approval from the President of the United States, who serves as Commander-in-Chief of all military forces. Only the President can authorize his execution. No execution date has been set, and it remains unclear when or if the execution will be carried out. This case represents one of the most serious examples of fragging in modern military history. Fragging refers to the deliberate killing of military personnel by fellow soldiers, usually using fragmentation grenades. While fragging incidents occurred during the Vietnam War, they are extremely rare in modern conflicts. Akbar's attack was particularly shocking because it happened not during combat, but in what should have been a safe rear area. It violated the most basic trust that exists between soldiers, the belief that they can count on each other for protection. Timothy B. Hennis. On May 9, 1985, in Fayetteville, North Carolina, a horrific crime unfolded just days before Mother's Day. Catherine Eastburn, wife of Air Force Captain Gary Eastburn, was home with her 3 young daughters, while her husband was away on military training in Alabama. The family was preparing for a move to England and needed to find a new home for their English setter dog, Dixie. They placed an ad in the local newspaper. The victims were Catherine Eastburn, a 31-year-old devoted military wife and mother, Kara Eastburn, 5 years old, the eldest daughter, Aaron Eastburn, 3 years old, and Jana Eastburn, 22 months old, the baby who survived. On May 7th, Timothy Hennis, a 27-year-old Army sergeant, responded to the dog adoption ad and visited the Eastburn home. 2 days later, Catherine was brutally attacked and stabbed multiple times. The killer then went to the children's bedrooms and stabbed both Kara and Aaron to death. Baby Jana was left unharmed in her crib. Police found fingerprints, hair samples, and evidence that someone had tried to cover up the crime. Witnesses reported seeing a tall man in a members-only jacket leaving the house, carrying a trash bag. Using witness descriptions, police created a composite sketch that strongly resembled Timothy Hennis. He was linked to the family through the dog adoption just 2 days before the murders. When witnesses saw Hennis in person, they positively identified him as the man they had seen leaving the house. He was arrested based on witness identification and his connection to the victims. Hennis was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault. In 1986, he was convicted and sentenced to death in civilian court. However, in 1989, the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned his conviction due to trial errors. In a retrial, he was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. After his acquittal, Hennis rejoined the Army and served until 2004. In 2006, new DNA testing matched samples from Catherine Eastburn's body to Hennis. Since double jeopardy prevented a civilian retrial, the military tried him in court-martial. On April 15, 2010, he was convicted and sentenced to death by military court. Timothy Hennis has been on military death row for approximately 15 years as of 2025. He is incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. No execution date has been set, and his case remains under appeal. In total, he has served about 19 years in prison. Hennis is the only person in American legal history to be acquitted of murder charges in civilian court, and then convicted and sentenced to death for the same crimes by a military court. This case demonstrates the complex relationship between civilian and military justice systems and shows how DNA technology can solve decades-old crimes. The case took 25 years to reach its final conviction, making it one of the longest-running murder cases in military history. Nidal Malik Hassan. November 5, 2009. Fort Hood, Texas, one of the largest military installations in the United States. Soldiers were going through routine medical evaluations at the Soldier Readiness Processing Center, preparing for upcoming deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. These brave men and women were getting ready to serve their country in dangerous war zones overseas. Among the military personnel at Fort Hood was Major Nidal Malik Hassan, a 39-year-old Army psychiatrist. As a doctor, Hassan was supposed to help soldiers deal with the mental stress of war. He had counseled many soldiers who were struggling with the trauma of combat. Hassan was born in Virginia to Palestinian immigrant parents. He had served in the army for many years and had been promoted to the rank of major, but in the months leading up to November 5th, his behavior had become increasingly strange. He had expressed anti-American views and had been in contact with radical Islamic clerics overseas. Despite these warning signs, he remained on active duty with access to the base. At approximately 1:30 p.m. on November 5, 2009, Major Hassan entered the Soldier Readiness Processing Center. He was armed with an FN-57 semi-automatic pistol and a revolver. The facility was crowded with soldiers and civilians going through medical evaluations. Without warning, Hassan stood up and shouted Allahu Akbar, an Arabic phrase meaning God is great. Then he began firing indiscriminately at everyone around him. People dove for cover under tables and chairs, but there was nowhere to hide in the crowded facility. Hassan moved methodically through the building, shooting at anyone he could see. He fired over 146 rounds during the attack, reloading his weapons multiple times. Witnesses described the scene as pure chaos, people screaming, running for exits, and trying to help the wounded while bullets flew around them. The attack lasted about 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity to those trapped inside. Hassan targeted both military personnel and civilians, showing no mercy to anyone. Some victims were shot multiple times as they lay wounded on the floor. The rampage only ended when civilian police officers arrived at the scene. They confronted Hassan in a gun battle and shot him multiple times, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. Even as he lay wounded, Hassan continued to pose a threat until he was finally subdued. The investigation into the Fort Hood shooting was straightforward in terms of identifying the shooter. Hassan was caught at the scene with the weapons in his hands. However, investigators wanted to understand his motives and whether he had acted alone. They discovered that Hassan had been in email contact with Anwar al-Awlaki, a radical Islamic cleric who encouraged violence against Americans. His communications showed that he had been radicalized and viewed the attack as justified. Investigators also found that Hassan had given away his possessions in the days before the attack, suggesting he knew he might not survive. He had also made statements to colleagues about his opposition to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The FBI investigation revealed that there had been warning signs about Hassan's radicalization, but they had not been properly addressed by military authorities. Nidal Malik Hassan was charged with 13 counts of premeditated murder and 32 counts of attempted premeditated murder. His court-martial began on August 6, 2013, nearly 4 years after the attack. The trial was complicated by several unusual factors. Hassan refused to shave his beard, claiming it was part of his religious beliefs. After lengthy arguments, the military judge allowed him to represent himself in court while remaining in a wheelchair due to his paralysis. During the trial, Hassan made little effort to defend himself. He admitted to the shootings and offered almost no defense. He told the court that he had switched sides and was now against the U.S. government. He refused to call any witnesses or testify in his own defense. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including witness testimony, video footage, and physical evidence from the scene. Survivors of the attack testified about the horror they had experienced and the lasting impact on their lives. On August 23, 2013, the military jury found Hassan guilty on all charges. The verdict was unanimous and came after less than 7 hours of deliberation. 5 days later, on August 28, 2013, he was sentenced to death. The sentence included forfeiture of all pay and allowances. Ironically, Hassan had continued to receive his military salary throughout his trial and dismissal from the service. As of 2025, Nidal Malik Hassan has been on military death row for approximately 11 years and 7 months. He is imprisoned at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, alongside the other 3 military death row inmates. His case is currently under automatic appeal, as required by military law for all death penalty cases. No execution date has been set, and the appeals process could take many more years. Hassan remains paralyzed from the waist down due to the injuries he sustained when police shot him during the attack. The Fort Hood shooting was the deadliest mass shooting on a U.S. military base in modern history. It highlighted serious gaps in the military's ability to identify and address radicalization among its own personnel. The attack was initially classified by the government as workplace violence rather than terrorism, a decision that was heavily criticized by victims' families and survivors. This classification affected the benefits and recognition available to the victims. Hassan's case raised important questions about religious extremism in the military and the balance between religious freedom and security concerns. It also led to changes in how the military monitors and responds to signs of radicalization. The fact that Hassan was a psychiatrist who was supposed to help soldiers made his betrayal even more shocking. He had taken an oath to do no harm as a doctor and to serve his country as a soldier, but he violated both of these sacred trusts. These 4 cases represent some of the most heinous crimes in U.S. military history. Each of these men violated the most sacred trusts of military service to protect the innocent and stand with their fellow soldiers. They now sit on death row, waiting for a punishment that may never come, as the U.S. military has not executed anyone since 1961. If you found this examination of military death row cases informative, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more true crime content. What do you think? Should the military carry out these long, detailed executions? Let us know in the comments below.